Hello, everyone, and welcome to CSG's informational, I'm so sorry, informational webinar regarding applications to develop new interstate compacts for occupational licensing. I first want to give everyone a reminder that this webinar will be recorded, and by continuing to participate in the meeting, you are agreeing to being recorded. Also, please stay on mute during the presentations, and if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them during the following Q&A session. Also, you will be able to have access to these slides after the webinar is finished. Next slide, please. As an overview, the Council of State Governments was founded in 1933 and is the nation's largest nonpartisan organization serving all three branches of government to champion excellence in state governments. And we are a region-based membership organization, and we focus on fostering an exchange of ideas to help state officials shape public policy. And now Matt will be going over some specifics about what an interstate compact is.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Good afternoon, everybody. Really excited that everyone was able to join us and learn a little bit more about what we are doing with interstate compacts for occupational licensure portability and the specific opportunity to apply for technical assistance with the development of an interstate compact on behalf of your profession. So, but we wanted to start out and just kind of as a kind of a baseline, make sure everyone understands what we're talking about here when we use the term interstate compact. And so we'll just briefly do an overview of what these mechanisms are, how they work, and how they support licensure portability. And then we'll get into talking a little bit of specifics about the application process and how your profession could potentially benefit from this grant opportunity that we have available. So in the most simple terms, what is an interstate compact? Our definition, a legal, legislatively enacted contract between two or more states that allows states to cooperatively address shared problems, maintain sovereignty over state issues, and respond to national priorities with one voice. I think the keys to hone in on here are that it's a legal contract, and then second, that it's legislatively enacted. So it's a legal contract between states. This isn't just a change of administrative rule or a board rule or something like that. This is a legal contract that's binding states together. And it is written into state statute, so it makes it a little more powerful than just a reciprocity agreement between states or something like that. It's a binding contract that has the force of law because it's written into your state statute. And then second, it's legislatively enacted. So it goes through the full legislative process like any other bill would, introduced into committee and passed by both houses and signed into law by the governor. And so that's what makes these unique, is because they're considered legal contracts and they're actually passed through the legislature. So they take some time to develop. They take a lot of buy-in and a lot of education to make sure that policymakers know what these things do, what they don't do. But the effect is something that is permanent and lasting and not easily changeable or altered. You can see here on the slide the picture of the driver's license, and that's the most common analogy that we typically give when pointing people in the direction of just explaining what these things are. So the states came together on this issue of how do our drivers drive across state lines when each of us have a license from a different state. That wasn't a federal mandate that came down and said states have to recognize each other's driver's license. The states came together and created an interstate compact to facilitate that process. And obviously all 50 states are members of the driver's license compact. And that was how that particular issue was solved. The states came together and came up with their own solution rather than having something handed down to them by the federal government. And just like your driver's license, with these occupational licensing compacts, the rules of the road apply in the state in which you're driving. If you're this particular individual and you have a Florida license and you go across state lines into Georgia and maybe they don't let you turn right on red, if you say, oh, I've got my Florida license where I'm allowed to do that, so I can do it here in Georgia, there, that officer that pulled you over is not going to cut you any slack just because you have a Florida license. You are expected to abide by the rules of the road where you practice, and the same applies for a lot of these licensure compacts. So that helps with the state sovereignty issue, because how states regulate professions stays in place. All right, so just a little bit of about these occupational licensure compacts. So fundamentally, at a base level, all they're trying to do is facilitate multi-state practice. So there's a lot of myths out there about what compacts do and don't do. Really, when you take everything away and get down to brass tacks, all we're doing is facilitating the process whereby a practitioner can practice in your state without having to go through the full licensure process. And really, this is all that these licensure compacts are trying to do, and it's the goal of all of them. We believe they maintain or improve public health and safety, largely down to the shared data system that governs the interstate compact. So all these compacts have a large complex data system that houses all the information about licensees that are practicing under the compact. So disciplinary actions, encumbrances, adverse actions, full transcripts, education history, employment history, all of that is housed within these compact data systems, and just allow the amount of information, the amount of data sharing among states, the amount of information exchange just really increases when your profession has an interstate compact like this, so that states are able to share information with one another and work better together. And like I said, with the last example about the driver's license, compacts preserve state authority over professional licensing. So for example, what it means to be an occupational therapist in Alabama stays in Alabama. If there's certain things that you can do as an occupational therapist in Alabama that maybe you can't do in other states, that all stays in place. All compacts do is help facilitate the process to get into your state. But once they're in your state, they have to abide by the Practice Act for the state that they're practicing in. So it maintains authority. You have control over your Practice Act still. You're not seceding any of that. It's really just the licensure process that is being altered as a result of the compact. We're just creating an additional pathway for practitioners who want to practice in multiple states. So you can see here, these have just exploded in popularity and interest over the past 10 years or so. 182 pieces of legislation just in the past 5 years. Almost all the states have passed at least one of the compacts, and most states have passed at least 2 or 3. Over half have passed at least 3. You can see the 9 professions that have these mechanisms in place for licensing portability. Here's the list here. Nursing, the nurse licensure compact leads the way with 38 states. That was the very first profession to pursue a compact for their practitioners for license portability. They did that in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then actually had a second iteration that went out in 2016, the Enhanced Nurse Licensure Compact. So 38 states are a member of that. And then you can see here some of the other ones, the Medical Compact for physicians and medical doctors, PT that covers physical therapists and physical therapy assistants. The Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact, that is a compact particular for telepsychology. So it has provisions in place for temporary in-person practice, but is primarily used for telepsychology. The EMS compact is for EMS professionals, audiology, speech pathology. And then the three over here on the right side, occupational therapy, counseling, and advanced practice nursing. You may notice that their numbers are significantly lower. That's mainly just due to the fact that these are brand new compacts, that they were just released out into state legislatures this year. And so the fact that OT got 9 states in their first year is pretty impressive. And we expect counseling and the APRN compact to be above 10 states in the next legislative session. So we certainly expect these numbers to increase. All right, so these are professions that CSG is currently working with on developing new interstate compacts. So you can see the list here: massage therapy, social work, cosmetology and barbering, K-12 teaching, dentistry and dental hygiene, and then physician's assistants. So the first 5 on this list, excluding physician's assistants, are all through a cooperative agreement that CSG has with the Department of Defense. That's really why we're here today, is the cooperative agreement that CSG has with DoD, because we are looking for, we're looking to add to this list. We're looking to expand the number of professions that we're working with, and there's the opportunity available for professions to apply to receive technical assistance from CSG with the development of new interstate compacts. But you can see here, there was kind of an initial RFA that we released last year. All of these professions were applied. It was a competitive application process and they were selected. But we're looking to grow this list and select more professions who want to pursue this type of mechanism for their practitioners. So these are really exciting professions to work with. You can notice from the previous list, comparing it to this list, we're moving kind of out of the allied health space and into some new areas here with K-12 teaching, with cosmetology and barbering, obviously social work, in the mental health professions that we're working with, counseling and psychology. So these can historically, these have primarily been for health professions, but we're moving into new spaces. So it's an exciting time for us at the National Center for Interstate Compacts, and excited for the new professions that we're going to be working with. All right, and here's just a heat map of where these compacts are most popular. So you can see Georgia leads the way. They've passed 8 of the 9. You see a cluster of states there in the Midwest, in the South are all above somewhere between 5 and 8 compacts that they've passed. So that's probably where these things are most popular. Interestingly enough, California and New York have yet to pass one. You know, those are 2 of our largest states in the union. But we're seeing movement in those types of states, but just historically, they New York and California have always been late adopters of compacts, and they've yet to pass any of these licensure compacts. We expect Connecticut and New Hampshire to get on board soon with at least a few of these. So the number of states that haven't passed any will be shrinking very soon. So. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits of these mechanisms. So benefits to practitioners. Obviously, the most important benefit and the main purpose behind these mechanisms is increased mobility. So we are facilitating a process by which you, through maintaining a home state license, are able to practice in other remote states through the compact. So you can say you live in Northern Kentucky and you want to practice in the greater Cincinnati area in Southern Ohio, in Southern Illinois. The compact would facilitate that process so that you only have to have that license in Kentucky and you can have access to markets in Ohio, in Illinois as well. So that's the primary benefit, the primary function that practitioners enjoy, is the increased mobility to be able to enter new markets and take their license and use it in other states. Leveraging telepractice. This is a big benefit of these licensure compacts. You can now, in the scenario that I just laid out, by maintaining one state license, you can now have access to dozens of remote states through technology, through telepractice, and the compact facilitates all of that. I was speaking to a woman the other day who is a social worker, and she's currently licensed in 24 states. And she has to maintain all 24 state licenses, all of that continuing education, all of those different renewal cycles with a compact that immediately goes away, and she would only have to maintain one license, and she would be able to access those other 23 states through the compact and not have to be licensed in all of those states. So it really alleviates a lot of burden and creates just a ton of new opportunity through telepractice. And we've seen this increasing, particularly during COVID-19 and the health pandemic. Telepractice has been a huge deal and utilized extensively. And so Compact creates a great means to be able to ensure that you're accessing licensed, qualified practitioners, but at the same time, you're able to see clients from all over the country. Third benefit here, and I mentioned this earlier, supporting relocating families, particularly military spouses. That's why DoD has given money to CSG to develop new interstate compacts, is because they want to solve this issue on behalf of their military spouses. You think about the fact that spouses move every 2 to 3 years on average. That's extremely burdensome for the military spouse to have to navigate that new state's licensure process every single time they move. So it's a burdensome process, and DoD sees interstate compacts as the gold standard for how do we alleviate these barriers for military spouses. So they have said that they want to work with CSG to create more of these compacts. And so that's the impetus behind this cooperative agreement. But DoD sees these as the best way to benefit military spouses and help alleviate those licensure barriers. All right, benefits to state boards. Why do state boards like these interstate compacts? They help facilitate delivery of care and assistance during a state or national disaster. I think we've touched on that with the COVID-19 pandemic. Through the nurse licensure compact, a lot of areas that were suffering severe nursing shortages, nurses were able to be fully mobile and travel all over the country and fill shortages where needed. And that was all facilitated through the nurse licensure compact. Secures agreement on uniform licensure requirements. So really that relates to the profession coming together around what are the requirements going to be for the practitioner in order to participate in the compact. And a lot of times we've seen professions really come into an alignment and come into agreement, like what is the competent beginner practitioner, what should they have in place in terms of education, training hours, experience. And so we've seen a compact kind of drive professions to pursue uniformity in order to help facilitate this cross-state practice. I mentioned the data system earlier. That's a massive benefit that boards really like. All of these compacts are governed by a sophisticated data system that houses information about all practitioners who are utilizing the compact. So everything, disciplinary actions, any pending investigations, adverse actions, education history, work history, that's all shared in the data system. It's all accessible for the member state boards to be able to see that information about people that are practicing in their state. Fourth bullet here, enhancing cooperation among state boards. This really it comes down to the point of compacts require that state boards participate together on joint investigations and joint disciplinary action. So if you think about the scenario where someone is licensed in state A and they have an issue in state B, there's some sort of malpractice or disciplinary action taken in state B, state A and B have to work together on that issue. And right now, without an interstate compact, there's no governing structure that says that states have to work together on these things. So, if you've got someone who's practicing in your state on, say, one of the universal license recognition bills or something like that, where maybe there's not any kind of direction as to how discipline is dealt with, then it's hard to say to the other state that you're working with, you need to, help me out with this investigation. This person's licensed in your state. You should help me with this investigation. They're not required to do so, but under the compact, they are. So state boards really like that. It requires that boards work together on disciplinary issues. And then expanding the ability to protect the public health and safety. That just kind of gets back to the point about state boards now have more information to make better public health and safety decisions through the compact. They have access to just so much information that's shared as a result of the compact, and they're able to better serve public health and safety. All right, why do states like interstate compacts? First off, and this was the point that I made right at the very beginning, this is state policy. So this is states coming together, crafting their own solution to a problem rather than getting something handed down to them by the federal government. So this is states coming together, solving something together, joint problem solving. And so states really like that rather than having something handed to them. They're able to craft something that fits the particular needs of states. Second, it strengthens state sovereignty. Again, back to the point on, when you're practicing in a remote state where you're not licensed, you have to abide by the rules of the road in that state. So the state maintains control over the Practice Act. The state maintains control over, what they particular things that you can and can't do in that state as a practitioner. So we think compacts help strengthen that state's ability. And then the last two are similar. It's increasing as a state, it's increasing your access to highly qualified practitioners. I'm reminded of we're working with the teachers on the teaching compact, and we're talking with a state superintendent, and he said, "You mean to tell me that because of this compact, I'm going to be able to recruit out-of-state teachers to come teach in my state, and I'm going to be able to put them to work straight away?" And yes, that is the reality. That's the scenario that under the teaching compact would be a reality. You now have access to highly qualified practitioners from other states that you can recruit to come into your state. So the reciprocity is two-way. It's not just one way where you're saying anybody with an out-of-state license can come into my state, but you're providing an opportunity for your practitioners as well to pursue other markets. So it really creates an equilibrium so that if there's areas of shortages, your practitioners can maybe access those. And then if you have your own shortages, you can recruit and fill those vacancies where needed. All right, so over the past 80 years or so that CSG has been working on interstate compacts, we've really honed our process for how we develop these. So I'm not going to go through step by step this entire process, but this is typically how we build these out. So really it's broken down into three phases. So phase one is development, where we work with the stakeholders within that profession to develop the model compact language. There's a robust stakeholder review process where everyone within the profession gets to provide their feedback and edits on the model language. And we take all that feedback and then we incorporate it into a new draft of the document. And all of that is shared with these two stakeholder groups, the technical assistance group and the document team. Those are the groups that are kind of helping CSG from a profession perspective help develop these, because we're not experts on dentistry, we're not experts on massage therapy, so we develop these groups of professionals who do have the expertise that we need that can help us craft the language so that it's viable for the profession. The second phase here is the education and enactment phase, and that's really where CSG works with policymakers. We provide resources, toolkits, do legislative testimony. We do a lot of presentations to state boards and things like that to try to help educate on the compact and make sure that there's no misconceptions or myths about what the compact does and doesn't do. And then we work with legislators to help enact the compact. So like I said at the very beginning, these are all passed through the legislature. So they go through the full legislative process. So we'll do legislative testimony and provide legislators with talking points about the compact, pretty much do anything to help the compact get passed in states. And really this phase 2, does not end until all 50 states have joined the compact. So if you think back to that slide where I listed all the active interstate compacts, none of them are at 50 states yet. So really none of them are out of this phase. All of them are still working with states to try to get these passed, and that work will continue until all 50 states are members of these compacts. The third phase, and this is really where CSG's involvement ends, is the transition and operation phase. So each of these compacts states how many states have to join in order for the compact to officially be activated. And once that occurs, usually it's somewhere between 7 and 10. So once that number of states passes the compact, the Interstate Commission is stood up. And the Interstate Commission is the governing body, the governing structure that oversees the daily operations of the compact. Every state that is a member of the compact, that has passed the compact, gets to appoint representatives to sit on this commission. And so CSG helps with the transition phase where we were previously kind of leading the work of the compact. That now transitions over to the commission, and the commission is just an instrumentality of the member states. And now they kind of take over the daily operations of the compact and take over all of the governance that follows. So that's where CSG's involvement really ends. Once the commission is stood up, the compact really doesn't need CSG very much anymore, and it's independent, it's up and running, and they can function for themselves. So those are kind of broadly the 3 phases of our compact development process, and be happy. I know there's a lot of information here, so if there's any questions about any of this, feel free just to pop that in the chat and I can answer any specifics. All right, so that's just a general overview about interstate compacts, about how they operate, which professions currently have these, some of the benefits that they provide, and then CSG's development process. So like I said at the very beginning, the purpose of this webinar and the purpose of our work with the Department of Defense is to develop new interstate compacts for new professions. So we want to, that list of 5 that I showed you earlier that are under development, we want to expand that list even more. And so CSG has funding to develop new interstate compacts for new professions who are interested in pursuing this type of mechanism for their practitioners. So you can see here, that's the purpose. We're working with DoD to fund new interstate compacts. It's one of the objectives here, and I want to be clear about this because this is usually a point of confusion for some people. One of the points here talks about, the compact, it needs to support military personnel, and that's why DoD is involved. Just to be clear, the compact is not only for military spouses and not only for active duty military personnel. The compact can benefit all practitioners. So DoD has graciously acknowledged that by developing a compact for the entire profession, that all of their military spouses will benefit as well. So we're not trying to create a compact just for military spouse teachers. We're trying to create a compact for all teachers, and military spouses will by default benefit. So just wanted to be clear about that point as well. Potential applicants, and this list is not exhaustive, but this is just based on folks who we think it makes sense to work with from CSG's perspective. National professional associations. So if you are a national association that represents a particular type of practitioner, certainly I would encourage you to consider this. Associations or federations of state boards. That's the most common group that we normally work with. Of all of the active interstate compacts, most of them, the kind of lead organization that's in charge is the board federation or a board association. So think about the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, the Federation of State Medical Boards. These are groups that represent all of the 50 state licensing boards for their particular profession. A coalition of licensing boards. So if you're one single board member or board administrator and you think, in my profession, there's a nexus of my peers that agree with me that this is something that they want, this is something that we want for our profession, you can jointly apply together. You can get, maybe 10 or 12 of your peers, your colleagues in the profession to jointly apply for this on behalf of your licensees. National credentialing body. So maybe you administer a national exam or a national certification that you'd be a great fit for this type of opportunity. And we're really looking in compacts really only make sense for professions that are licensed in the majority of states. So we've put here, and this is not any kind of a firm threshold or requirement, but generally compacts work well if the profession is licensed in at least 30 states. So if you're, you're in a profession that's only licensed in 10 or 15 states, then a compact really isn't the mechanism for you from our perspective. Maybe you need to just think about honing in on some robust reciprocity agreements for those few states that do license the profession. But generally, these work well if they're licensed in the majority of states. So it's just a brief list of some of the types of organizations that we would typically work with. But again, this list is not exhaustive and no one is ineligible from applying for this. Just a note about funding. So the Department of Defense has given CSG funding to develop interstate compacts. The folks who are applying for this opportunity will not actually be receiving direct funding, but CSG is going to fund everything on behalf of the selected applicant. So things like we host a lot of meetings and convenings that are all necessary to develop these compacts. And so CSG pays for all of that, all the travel, all the legal expenses that come with hiring attorneys and things that will draft the language. So CSG funds all of it. And we fund everything up to the point of finalizing the model legislation. And then phase 2 and 3, where it's out in the states to get passed, that's where our involvement ends in terms of this particular funding opportunity. So the applicant who applies would need to understand that they would be responsible for doing the lobbying, the advocacy to get it passed in the states. CSG is available for technical assistance throughout the application process. So DoD has been very generous and allowed us to work with applicants. So if you are considering applying and you want more information, you just want to have a conversation about whether or not you think you would be a good fit or whether or not this would be feasible for your profession, we would welcome you to do that and reach out to us, and you can reach out to the shared email inbox there that's listed, or I'll provide my contact information at the end of this presentation, and you can just reach out to me directly. To apply, it's pretty simple. We have a fillable application form on the website here, compacts.csg.org/apply. And we just ask that those be submitted by January 31st at 5 p.m. So you've got plenty of time. If you want to talk to us about particular answers in your application, if any of it is confusing and you just want clarity, we're always available to provide assistance regarding the actual application itself. All All right, so here's our contact information. This is for myself and the director of the CSG National Center for Interstate Compacts, Dan Logston, who unfortunately was not able to join us today, but reach out to either of us. We are very responsive via email or you can give me a call. Either one. We'd love to talk to you more about this opportunity and whether or not this would make sense for your profession that you represent. So with that, that is all the information that I had to present, and we'll transition over and I will answer some questions. So Caitlin, any questions come in the chat that we need to address?
Yes, we've gotten quite a few questions, and if anyone has any more, feel free to put it in the chat. The first one comes from Laura, who asks a couple of questions, which are that for professions that aren't licensed in every state, can compacts allow a provider with a home state license to practice in a state that doesn't license that provider type, or is licensure in both states requisite for a state to enact a compact?
That's a great question. And typically how compacts work is that licensure is a requirement of the to participate in the compact. The state does have to license the profession, and then they also have to join the compact. So we're currently working with massage therapy, which is licensed in 47 states, I think. And in California, they don't license. They have a certification, and so California would not be eligible to join the compact because they haven't licensed the profession. They just have that state certification. So that would preclude them from participating.
Laura also asked if states have to work together on disciplinary actions. Can that increase cost for one or both regulatory boards?
Yeah, that's another good question. And we haven't seen that from any of the compacts that we typically work with. That is something common that we've heard about. That's a concern from boards, but in reality, we really haven't seen that. And there's ways in which compacts can offset costs to state boards by issuing, additional fees for that compact license. I think, we want to remove barriers, but also recognize that in order to build a system that facilitates that costs money, and boards are often operating on really thin margins. And so in order to be mobile, sometimes practitioners have to absorb some of that cost themselves. So we've seen compacts handle that in different ways as well, how they kind of help the boards alleviate some of the cost barriers there.
Al Trace asks, hourly requirements for massage therapy range from 500 to 1,000. How would this be resolved?
Sure. So that's up to the stakeholder group that is going to be making recommendations on behalf of that profession. So we've put together a group of leaders in the massage therapy industry. It's about 30 folks, and they're currently meeting regularly. We meet with them every 2 weeks to talk about the massage therapy compact and how they might address that particular issue. And that's a great question, and we don't have an answer yet, but I'll say typically how states or how compacts address this is either by stating a specific requirement. For the nursing compact, they state that you have to have a nursing degree from a accredited nursing program and pass the NCLEX. So those are two requirements that are stated in the compact in order for participation. So for massage therapy, they could potentially include that as a requirement. You have to have had at least 500 hours, for example. Not saying that they've decided on that yet. Other compacts, such as physical therapy, have not addressed licensure requirements at all and have made everything contingent on you having a valid unencumbered license in another member state. So they said, we don't care about the requirements from the other state. All we care about is that you actually have a license in that state, and then we will accept you into our state. So it could be handled through actually making a requirement in the compact for a specific number of hours, or you could just not speak to it and say, we're just gonna, if you have a valid license in another state, you're eligible to participate through the compact.
Jacqueline asks, how do new trends like universal licensure affect compacts?
Good question. So most of these universal recognition bills exempt interstate compacts. So almost all of them have specific language that says, here are all the professions that are covered underneath this universal recognition law. And if you're a part of an interstate compact, you're excluded from this, which I think from CSG's perspective, we would encourage. We certainly don't disagree with universal recognition. I think they provide great benefit, particularly for professions where maybe you don't need as much heightened public protection. If you think about professions like counseling, like physical therapy, like medicine, those are professions where you can do significant damage and significant harm. So we think a compact is necessary in those professions for the kind of heightened public protection and public health and safety. But for a profession like you're talking about auctioneers, landscape architects, groups like that, maybe they don't need an interstate compact. Maybe universal recognition suits their needs perfectly because there's not a need for this big formal structure to kind of help facilitate the process and ensure that the public is still being protected. So I think universal recognition is good and makes sense for certain professions. There's just other professions where you need a little bit more certainty around public health and safety, and we think compacts are a better fit for those professions.
Next, Reno asks, can states have access to compact data for licensed professions through CSG to meet state level data needs?
So CSG actually doesn't house any of the compact data systems. That's all housed at the Interstate Commission. And whether or not that data would be publicly available, I do think some of the compact commissions have a public facing side to their data system where you can access certain data points about practitioners. Excuse me, but CSG does not house all of that data. You need to go and talk to the individual compact. So if you're interested in data on nurses, I just encourage you to go to the Nurse Licensure Compact website and try to talk to them there. So.
And then Tiffany has two questions, which is that can an application for grant funds be applied for prior to legislation being passed, and is grant funding for new professions that are not currently sponsored?
Okay, so I think I understand saying that is the funding available if there's still legislation pending for states to license the profession? Is that it, Caitlin?
I think so, yes.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, so again, that 30 threshold is arbitrary. If if your profession is licensed in 20 states and there's legislation that's pending and you feel like, within 5 years, we're going to be upwards of 25, 30 states, would certainly not discourage you from applying, and I would welcome you to, make the argument that a compact makes sense for your profession, and that within the near future you'd be able to have a majority of states that have licensed the profession. So wouldn't say that should preclude you from applying.
Okay, I believe a couple more questions from Cheryl. They wanted clarification that this assists a person who has already obtained a license in another state for portability to other states, and it's not for education from an institution in one state to be acceptable in another state to pursue the first license.
Yes, absolutely. So this is for all active licensees. So obviously those new graduates are gonna be ones that want to access the compact and be able to be mobile early in their career. But these are this is for anyone who holds a license. And if there's a particular requirement that goes into the compact that maybe there would need to be some grandfathering, that's has precedence as well. So, if someone's been a licensee for 20 years and maybe they didn't pass a particular exam that's newer in the profession, they would certainly still be able to access the compact, and there'd be grandfathering provisions to accommodate. So yes, this is for the whole profession, all active licensees.
And I believe second to last, Carol asked that it seems that compacts between lesser number of states could pose some issues such as differences in statute requirements for renewal or how these are applied. And would these problems necessarily go away if 6 to 8 states formed a compact, or is this something CSG would help resolve?
Okay, I think I'm understanding the question. So in terms of, sorry, Caitlin, can you just read it one more time?
Yes. They said that it seems that compacts between lesser numbers of states could pose some issues, such as differences in statute requirements for renewal or how strictly they are applied. And would this necessarily go away if 6 to 8 states formed a compact? Or would this be something CSG helps resolve?
Okay, yeah. And so this is one of the big reasons why we would suggest that a compact set their threshold number of states for triggering activation at more than 6 to 8. That's why we would suggest that it would be more like 10, I think is the target number that we normally give. And, that's for political viability, but certainly, 2 states makes a compact. It's just a legal contract. So if 2 states wanted to pass a compact, that would still be legal in binding. But most of these licensure compacts set that number at least 10 in order to avoid that particular situation. But in terms of, I think specifically she mentioned like renewal and requirements in statute and stuff. And this is a point of clarification as well. But since interstate compacts are a contract between states, they're kind of in this space of law that's above state law, and so they supersede any conflicting state statute. I will say that license renewal isn't typically something that's ever superseded by the compact, because that your single state licensure process still remains in place. We're just creating an avenue for multi-state practice that's different, and in addition to the single state licensure process that's already in place in your state. So practitioners can always just go to the individual state board and apply for one single state license. That doesn't go away. We're just creating a new avenue through the compact where you would only have to maintain that one single home state license and abide by that renewal cycle, and you wouldn't have to worry about renewals in other states. You would only have to maintain your home state license. So I hope that addresses the question.
And also, Robin asked, how can one serve on the stakeholder committee for the development of a professional interstate compact?
Sure. So you can reach out to us at CSG in whatever compact you are particularly interested in or have expertise on. Just let us know, or a particular profession. I mean, just let us know, and we'll consider that. These lists are developed with our the organizations that we partner with that applied for this opportunity. So it can't, certainly can't make any promises, but everyone can participate in the stakeholder review process. And I want to be really clear about that. If you are particularly interested in any of these compacts that are under development, teaching, social work, cosmetology, we would invite you to reach out to CSG, give us your name, and tell us which compact that you want to be participate in the stakeholder review for. And whenever that model legislation is done, we'll send it to you, and you'll have full ability to provide edits and feedback, and we would welcome that. So everyone who wants to participate in the process can. We can't have everyone at the table because nothing would ever get done. So we kind of have to keep the groups a little bit smaller in order to facilitate just efficiency of our time and actually move forward in the process. But anyone who wants to participate in stakeholder review can do so.
Okay. We had just a quick few new ones come in. Laura asked what the timeline from the time of application to selection to when things are organized, what that would be for the development.
Yeah, so the deadline for applying is January 31st, and we will look to make selections probably at the beginning of March. So we'll grade all the applications in February, and then we actually don't do the selecting. DoD does the selecting, so we submit our recommendations to DoD, and then they make the final decision. So that's why we're able to provide technical assistance throughout the development process, because we're not actually the final decision makers. So we'll make an announcement about the professions that are selected in March, and then we'll hit the ground running probably April and May, starting with whoever applied for the opportunity, starting to put together that initial stakeholder group and doing a big kickoff meeting for the profession and things like that. So once the professions are announced in March, it's pretty quick for us to kind of get into the work. So.
And the last question I believe I have here is Ralph asked if you could clarify, I believe, the inclusion of the trades, and if Ralph, they would like to clarify that question at all, they are welcome to.
Sorry, so the question was about if trades are eligible to apply?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes. Unless they would like to clarify that.
Sure, yeah. Certainly no one is ineligible from applying. And I think we've talked with a couple organizations that represent trades before. I think the major barrier there is just the amount of variation across states in terms of licensure requirements, but then also scope of practice and just like what it means to be a journeyman plumber in one state looks different in other states. And so it's not as streamlined as healthcare, but that's not to say that you shouldn't consider it. I think you should certainly consider it. And if there's a way we can make it work, we would think that would be a great sector of industry to work with that currently doesn't have anything like this in place. So yes, certainly eligible to apply. Traditionally, these have been utilized by healthcare professions because of how streamlined they are across states, but trades would certainly be eligible as well.
I believe that would answer all the questions, unless anyone has any last minute ones they would like to put in the chat. I haven't seen any more.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time and attention today. And we'll wrap it up here. Again, Feel free to reach out to us at compacts@csg.org or visit our website, compacts.csg.org, for complete information about how to apply for this opportunity, and then just general information about interstate compacts as well. So really appreciate everyone's time and attention today, and have a great rest of your day.